Okay, I think he has to. Aha, there we go.
Can you hear me?
This is why they can't start the clock until we've actually made sure it's all working. All right, guys. So what we're going to be doing tonight is talking, debating Donald Trump or Gary Johnson. Now, some of you have no clue who I am, so I wanted to spend a second just kind of bring you up to speed on who I am. Not to boast or anything like that, but just so you kind of know a little bit about my background and that I haven't just come into this movement in the last year or two. And I'm definitely not a Republican, and I'm definitely not a Democrat. I've never been a member of any political party in my life. I was born in New Zealand to a 15-year-old, and she kicked me out home when I was 7, and the state looked after me from 7 through 13. So I'm very familiar, intimately familiar with the state and how it wants to nanny us. And when it handed me back to my mother at 13, she kicked me out again. Then I spent almost 3 years living on the streets. So because of that, I have nothing past the 7th grade formal education. I'm completely autodidactic, self-taught. I've lived all over the world. I've created 9 companies in my life, very successful software companies, and had a lot of fun. Came to the United States 10.5 years ago, and I've been a serial entrepreneur the entire time I've been here. I've never had a job in the United States. I have never, at any time, been an employee since I was 21 years old. So a lot of the things Donald Trump has to talk about really deeply touch the way I live my life as an entrepreneur. And I think that's a message you probably haven't heard before, and you're going to hear about that tonight. So thank you, everybody, for coming. But thanks most of all to Michael Pickens for inviting me to this debate. It's really been a surprise and a pleasure. Thank you so much, sir. And I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, Israel. I'll go ahead and start off the same way. I'll talk a little bit about my background in the liberty movement and how I got to the Libertarian Party to where we're at today. So in 2007, 2008, I was watching the very first Fox News debate, and there was a guy on stage, Ron Paul, and he said, the terrorists don't hate us because we're free and prosperous. They hate us because we've been over there meddling their businesses since 1953. And that kind of hit me, and I started doing more research and learning more, and that's when I found out about libertarianism. Now, he didn't win the nomination, and I went back to business, focused on my own personal business at the time, and didn't get back involved until 2011, when I decided to leave the Republican Party and join the Libertarian Party. So that's when I started my journey in the Libertarian Party. It's been 5 years as a volunteer and activist. So as we get into this, Israel, I want to thank you, start off by thank you for being in this debate. I really appreciate, and I know the value that you've brought to the Liberty Movement, to the Ron Paul campaign, to the Rand Paul campaign, and the help that you've done within the Libertarian Party over this, Gary Johnson campaign, and before that with Austin Peterson. So I want to thank you, right? The issue we're debating tonight is the question, should libertarians vote for Donald Trump over Gary Johnson? Now, over the course of this debate, I'm going to lay out why it's in the best interest of libertarians around the country to support Gary Johnson and other down ballot libertarian candidates. Now, I accept that Gary Johnson's not perfect, right? But he's leaps and bounds ahead of Donald Trump on civil and economic liberties. On isidewith.com, I match up 98% with the Libertarian Party. I match up 89% with Gary Johnson, and I match up 32% with Donald Trump. I would imagine that most libertarians would be somewhere close to those numbers, somewhere close to matching up way more with Gary Johnson versus Donald Trump. Let's talk about Gary Johnson. Gary Johnson's honest. He's kind. He's thoughtful. He's not power hungry. He's not someone who needs to put his name on every project that comes to mind. This is a humble and strong two-term governor, someone who can stand up to the pressure without resorting to name calling, without resorting to interrupting, without resorting to arrogance, someone who vetoed over 700 spending bills as governor without caving to the pressure coming from his own party, and someone who could also admit when he was wrong. This is someone we need in a position of leadership, someone who I can confidently put my credibility behind, and someone I'm not ashamed to support. On the other hand, we have Donald Trump, whose policies even his most ardent supporters have a hard time keeping up on. He's actually shifted his stances 132 times on 22 different issues since he announced his candidacy back in 2015. This is a man who wants to win an election. This is a man who will shift opinions to gain votes, who will shift his stances to appease the audience in front of him. This is a man who, by Israel's own admission, is an authoritarian. On Israel's live stream on his Facebook page on October 20th, he stated that he believes that Trump is an authoritarian, not a libertarian. So I've personally been trying to study Trump's position, but it's very difficult because they change so often. It's hard to keep up. So I went to his website and actually pulled some of the most anti-libertarian stances from his website. So let's talk about immigration. And I quote, "Build an impenetrable physical wall on the southern border on day one. Mexico will pay for it." This is on his website. How can a libertarian support that? "All immigration laws will be enforced. We will triple the number of ICE agents." That's on his website. So he wants to triple the number of immigration agents. And on Wednesday, August 31st, during a policy address, Trump said he would create an immigration task force and target 5 to 6.5 million undocumented immigrants for swift removal. How can a libertarian support that? On the Second Amendment, and I quote from his website, "Reinstate and expand Project Exile." This was a law put in place in Virginia in 1997, which enacted a 5-year minimum sentence in a federal prison if you owned a firearm without a permit or government permission. How can a libertarian support that? On foreign policy, this is his quote, "Peace through strength will be at the center of our foreign policy." Donald Trump recently said in a debate that he would kill the families of terrorists. He's talking about murdering innocent people. He's talking about increasing the hatred for America. I just did a video on this. Since 2011, terrorist attacks have increased by 6,500%. And the strategy that Donald Trump is talking about is the exact strategy that caused the increase in terrorism. It's called blowback. You know, Israel, Ron Paul talked about it, right? How can a libertarian support murdering innocent people? It just doesn't make any sense, right? In regards to healthcare, he wants to repeal and replace Obamacare day one. Then in a 60-minute interview, he says, everyone's going to be covered, the government's going to pay for it. Basically talking about universal health care. Would a libertarian support that? On trade, Trump wants to enact a 45% tariff on or tax on all Chinese goods. Now, what does increased taxes do? It hurts consumers, it hurts the population, right? Increases prices across the board. Would a libertarian do that or support that? And now the big one, on Russia, the World War III fear-mongering with Russia. Trump said in this last debate that he has no relationship with Putin or business ties in Russia. However, in 2013, in an interview in Moscow that you can watch online, he was asked point blank, "Do you have a relationship with Vladimir Putin?" And he said, and I quote, "I do have a relationship, and I can tell you that he is very interested with what we are doing here today." And let's take a look at the people that he surrounds himself with. Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign chair before he resigned in August, was a longtime consultant to Viktor Yanukovych, the Russian-backed president of Ukraine, who was overthrown in 2014. Manafort also has done multi-million dollar business deals with Russian oligarchs. Trump's foreign policy advisor, Carter Page, has his own business ties to the state-controlled Russian oil giant Gazprom. Another Trump foreign policy advisor, retired Army Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, flew to Moscow last year and attended a banquet and was seated near the head of the table near Putin. And this is a quote from Donald Trump's son, Donald Jr. Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. We see a lot of money pouring in from Russia. And that was at a conference in 2008. So of course, Putin wants Trump to win. Putin's financial backers and Russia has a lot to gain by a Trump presidency. And it looks like Trump has a lot to gain as well. So any talk of World War III with Russia is complete fear-mongering, right? Complete fear-mongering, and we can't pay attention to it because it's not going to help us in the long run. I've done a lot of research on the history of the Libertarian Party, and I can tell you that the number one reason why the Libertarian Party hasn't been as successful as we should have, it's not the Republicans and Democrats. It's not the rules and restrictions put in our place. It's not the media. It's fear. We've allowed people like the media, like these politicians like Donald Trump, like Israel even in this situation, to keep us in fear. We've allowed our own fear to control our actions, to not stretch our comfort zones, not learn new skills, to not strike up conversations with strangers because we're afraid of what they might think. This is the number one reason we haven't been as successful in the past, because we've allowed fear to take over, right? I took this debate with you, Israel, to stop you from trying to scare my friends, my family, the people that I know into voting for Donald Trump. I took this debate to show as many people as possible that this is nothing more than more fear-mongering, and that some of us are so willing to step up to bullies and fight back, right? My friends and I are not willing to sit here and allow this to happen again, another election cycle, being bullied into voting for one of the major parties. It's not going to happen. Now, I just scratched the surface with a lot of the data points against Donald Trump, right? Any rational and logical libertarian, in my opinion, can use simple inductive reasoning and see that a vote for Donald Trump won't advance liberty.
You know, I could, thank you, Michael. I could talk a lot about the Libertarian Party and what went down in Orlando and the coup d'etat that occurred with Ron Nielsen and Gary Johnson's people and Austin Peterson and Alicia Dern, and just a WikiLeaks grade level of scandal that occurred there in Florida. But we don't have time for that. But you should investigate that, because Michael likes to paint a very pretty picture of the Libertarian Party. It is no different from the Democrats. It's no different from the Republicans. The Republicans have invaded and infiltrated successfully the Libertarian Party. Who are the nominees of the Libertarian Party? A former Republican governor and a former Republican governor. One of them, Bill Weld, decidedly not even remotely close libertarian. Okay, so it's something to consider, but I'd love to spend 5 minutes really kind of bringing you guys up to speed on what the Libertarian Party has done in its 40+ year existence. But there are issues that you are unaware of because they haven't been brought out in the open, and I want to kind of go over those things. I'm an immigrant to this country. I've been here 10.5 years, and I am an entrepreneur, a very proud entrepreneur. It's said that we're the only people that work 80 hours a week to avoid working 40. We work our ass off because we want the accomplishment, higher standard of living. We want more income in our lives. We want to be somebody that actually contributes massively in society. Contribution is something that drives entrepreneurship. And the main reason that I have just in the last week and a half changed my opinion and switched to Donald Trump is because when he started putting out actual policy, the entrepreneur inside of me started to come alive. Now, where do I stand as a libertarian? I kind of left that out in the last segment, but you know, I've been privileged to spend some time with Ron Paul, and I get to go down there, and he and I get to sit around his kitchen table and talk and get kind of deep into conversation. The great thing about Ron Paul and I is we don't differ on anything, and it doesn't make it boring because we start to then get strategic on how we could do things. And you know, you're going to see some really cool stuff on Facebook very soon that I'm helping Ron Paul with. It's very exciting to me. So, you know, when people say I'm not a libertarian, that's definitely offensive, right? I've been a libertarian since I was 5 years old. I've never been a Democrat, never been a Republican. My heart is that I deserve freedom and liberty in my life. I came to the United States of America legally 10.5 years ago because this is the land of opportunity. I came here because there are more opportunities here than there are in my native New Zealand, Australia. I grew up in both countries. And you come here and it's a gold field. You just have to get out there and mine it. You just have to extract the gold. But there is so much opportunity. And as with all entrepreneurship, you create wealth by adding value to the lives of other people. But this country over the last 10 years has made it so more difficult as an entrepreneur. We look at the small businesses that are failing. We look at the statistics, and 95% of small businesses will fail within their first 5 years. That is destroying our country. There's two major reasons why these businesses are failing. Reason number one is burdensome regulations. Reason number two is taxation. When I have to spend so much money on attorneys, on CPAs, on other consultants to help me navigate bureaucratic mess that is Washington, D.C. and state as well, that slows me down. That we hear the horror stories right now with Obamacare, with the doctors having to spend more money on accountants than other staff. It's getting very, very, very crazy out there for us entrepreneurs. And that, when I started hearing that, when I started hearing that one of the things that Donald Trump wanted to do was radically cut regulations and taxation, I started to listen. As an employee, you don't get to see those things. They're behind the scenes. Your employer looks after all those. They're the ones that has the burden of having to understand all of that. As an employee, you just turn up, you do your work, you get a paycheck at the end of the week. Behind the scenes, that's not how it's working at all. And it's tearing business apart in this country. So when Donald Trump comes in, he says, we're going to reduce regulations. And the biggest one that he's talked about is the tax code. Massive simplification of the tax code. The burden for me, the fear, approaching tax day and, making sure everything you've done is okay and you're, avoiding tax, not evading tax, and the fine gray lines that often exist in these things and making sure you're getting the expert. This is paralyzing the entire economy in this country. And what's happening is that massive conglomerates are enabled through this because they can afford the cost, but we can't. I can't. I've started 3 companies in this country since I've been here. And fourth, I just started another company 9 days ago. I love creating. I love innovating. I love bringing things to a marketplace that has a desire for what I want to create for it. Many people are like that, but we're being held back by these bureaucratic regulations and an obscene tax code and obscene taxation. So let's go through some of these real things. Regulations, the tax code, the red tape, the cost, stress, the time, and then reduced personal regulations. Donald Trump has said states need to be looking after far more of these things, a 10th Amendment position. And then he's talked about reduced taxation, the company tax rate down to 15%. The average family will see a decrease in their taxes of 35%. The tax thresholds will be reduced from 7 thresholds down to 3. The tax code is going to be radically simplified, removing loopholes that allow companies to avoid paying taxes. And he makes a point in saying this, that yes, this is actually going to affect him and his business. He is going to be paying more tax. It's a very interesting thing. We'll come back to that if we got time. The corporate tax rate for bringing money back into the United States. Apple, famous example, $167 billion overseas as of 2 quarters ago, I believe. That money, Tim Cook tried to bring that money home with Obama for 15%. Obama wouldn't agree to it. The money stayed there. Now, Donald Trump comes along and says 10%, and the money is coming back. This money is huge. Apple already committed to spend an enormous percentage of that on Reserve. We haven't had a candidate talking about the audit of the Federal Reserve in a very long time. And Ron Paul himself says that no candidate has got closer to him in talking about the Federal Reserve as Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is very serious about auditing the Federal Reserve. A non-interventionist foreign policy, rebuild the military. Now, I've been following Ron a long time. Ron Paul will tell you that in the 2007-8 election, no, it was one of the two, I can't remember, it was 7-8 or 11-12. He told us that one of the very first things he would do as president is commission 5 brand new submarines. The moment that he became president. Ron Paul wants to rebuild the military too. It's not about creating a larger empire. It's about rebuilding the stockpile that has become depleted through the wars in the Middle East. And that does need to happen. But going to war with other countries, Michael said we shouldn't fearmonger, and then he starts fearmongering, saying Trump is going to be just like the rest. It's just not true. While Donald is a hothead and says some things that are ridiculously absurd, like killing the families of terrorists, which is not going to happen. It's against the Geneva Convention. It's not going to happen. You know, or there's many other things too that he says are just ridiculous. Stop and frisk. Stop and frisk is not constitutional. It'll go straight to the Supreme Court. It'll be heard in short notice because of the nature of it, and it'll be struck down. It's never going to happen. And you'll find that he stopped saying that. Now, has he backtracked on a lot of stuff? He has. He's backtracked on a lot of stuff because in his way of doing businesses, he shares from his heart, and then he puts experts around him. He's a king of delegation. He's taught this to people all his life. Don't do anything yourself. Delegate to the right people. Replace Obamacare. Now, of course, from a libertarian perspective, it sounds very scary. But what is he replacing Obamacare with? Health savings accounts, competition amongst private and public hospitals and doctors, competition from insurance companies across state lines. He explained this yesterday in a talk that he gave, and you know, this should sound very familiar because that was Ron Paul's plan. In fact, as we go along here and we start looking at all these major issues, a Second Amendment, nationwide right to carry. Let's not be scared about him on guns. I mean, personally, I just don't have a big deal with the whole, hey, if you're on the no-fly list, you can't have a gun. Who the hell is on the no-fly list, for Pete's sake? I mean, yeah, there are problems. Somebody's probably going to be there that shouldn't be. But less than 0.00001% of the population, the rest of us get to open carry across the nation under a Trump presidency. Trump's huge on the Second Amendment. These are things that you guys are just not hearing because nobody wants to talk about it. These things are going to make our lives materially better. Now, these things should sound pretty familiar because these are all Ron Paul's talking points in both the 2007-8 and 2011-12 election. Am I saying that he's Ron Paul? No, I'm saying if you're going to be distracted by what other parties want you to look at and what representatives of those parties want you to look at, instead of actual policies that are going to make a material difference in the lives of 315 million Americans, then I think you're being distracted. Because as it was said long ago, it's the economy, stupid. We have to rebuild the economy. You can argue all you want that this or that is not libertarian, and I'd agree. You have no argument from me at all. But if you're missing the material benefit to you and 315 million other Americans, then you have a serious problem here. This is the epitome of not seeing the forest for the trees. We got to look at the bigger picture. We need to rebuild the economy. We need to pull our troops back from all around the world. We need a non-interventionist foreign policy. We need to audit the Federal Reserve. We need to reduce theft in the country via way of taxation and burdensome regulations. These are the real issues that affect people. You know, some people, and I know that Michael's probably going to bring this up and say, well, we've got these principles we've got to go by. If sticking to our principles is going to lead 315 million people to suffer more, then those principles aren't worth having in the first place. Principles are supposed to be like a guiding star to where we want to go. We choose that because we believe it's the best. Well, what I believe is the best is to make a decision that we assist 315 million people across this country to get their lives back together again, to bring the jobs back, to enable the entrepreneurs to open new businesses and to employ people without all the regulations that require me to employ an attorney to understand and pay a fortune for. Bring your economy back in this country. Be distracted if you want. You can argue over whether something is libertarian or not. Okay, I'm more interested in bringing liberty to 315 million people in a very real and tangible way in their lives.
So everyone, I'm a little confused. I don't know if Israel and I are talking about the same Donald Trump. A lot of the things that Israel just brought up, I'll go over and I'll address them. But this is not the same Donald Trump that's been talking most of his life, right? He may have just shifted his opinions recently when he found out that it'll get him more votes and it'll excite his base if he changes his positions, right? So first off, federal regulation. Federal regulation is just one piece to the puzzle. And for Israel to say that Donald Trump would actually reduce federal regulation, I don't get it, because Trump's actually used regulation to his advantage, to his entire life. He's used eminent domain to his advantage, right? Gary Johnson has a proven track record of actually reducing regulation. And the federal regulations, that's just part of the puzzle, because you have city regulations, you have county regulations, you have state regulations. And I want to know, Israel, right? How would Donald Trump help local and state and county libertarian candidates get elected, or libertarian leaning candidates get elected? He's been proven so far to support Democrats. So I'd like to hear.
Oh, sure. You see, the Libertarian Party has gone astray, just like the Republican Party. So I don't see any purpose in defending the Libertarian Party's actions. The Libertarian Party needs to be punished for making Gary Johnson their nominee 2 years in a row, the least libertarian candidate the Libertarian Party has ever had. It's time for the Libertarian Party to sit in the corner with a dunce cap on and learn a lesson. Next time.
Okay, so Donald Trump, what you're saying is he is not going to help reduce those regulations at the state level, at the county level, at the city level. So just at the federal level, even if he's actually going to follow through with it, it's just going to make a little bit of a difference. So the next thing, you said that Donald Trump is not going to kill the families of terrorists because of the Geneva Convention. So he's not going to kill the families of terrorists because he's a good person, or just because okay, no answer. Pass it back. And then as far as the Second Amendment, wanting to be able to take away people's rights to firearms just because they're on a government list is kind of the same talk of, let's say, you don't want the government spying on you as long as you have nothing to hide, right? That's what they say. Why would you care if there's a list that exists if you've got nothing to
Oh, you should give me some warning there. You know, it affects so small of us. We need a picture. I'm not going to be affected. You're not going to be affected. No one we know is going to be affected by this. 314.9999 Americans are not going to be affected by this. We need to start living in reality.
So as long as it's just a minority that's affected, it's okay. We infringe on the minority.
Choices need to be made that are going to bring liberty to the great.
Okay. So choices need to be made to help the American people, but not all the American people, just the majority of the American people. Okay, I'll take that as a yes. I'll take that as a yes. All right. So what we have to look at as libertarians across the country, do we want to listen to Israel? So yeah, there were some things at the National Convention that were not that good, right? Gary Johnson, his election, he won by a majority, but he didn't cheat. The Libertarian Party leadership didn't ram new bylaws down the throats of the delegates. They didn't install a candidate like the Republicans and the Democrats do. He thinks that the Libertarian Party is just a corrupt party. Well, guess what? The Libertarian Party is made of people. The people that I know in the Libertarian Party are honest. They're going to hold other members of the Libertarian Party accountable, just like we did with Representative John Moore in Nevada. The Libertarian Party in Nevada voted unanimously to censure him, for voting to increase taxes, and the National Party is about to vote on it as well. We are definitely not like.
Except that the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire just censored Bill Weld. Hey.
And that's their choice. They're independent. The parties are independent from national. So.
Okay, he's just going to keep throwing the mic back, so I'm just going to end this and let him get the last word, since that's obviously what he wants so badly. Who's for Trump out there? Thomas Massey, Walter Block, Stefan Molyneux, Christopher Cantwell, Lou Rockwell, and those are big names that you've known. But let's look at people that started off the Liberty Movement in 2007-8. Gigi Bowman, Tracy Diaz, Judy Morris, Gary Franchi, Tina Downer, myself. This is the old guard. It's the people that have been around following Ron Paul, loyal to Ron Paul for so long. We're getting what's going on here. We need to vote for Dr. Paul. Now, some of you are going to think, hey, I can't because I'm veering away from the philosophy. So I came up with this analogy to help you see that that's not what you're doing. When a sailor is on a ship and he's navigating his ship through seas, he's got a star, that North Star. That North Star is our philosophy. But when we see that the ship is coming upon rocks, we don't take our eyes off the star. We keep it there, but we move our ship out of the way of the rocks that we are approaching. We navigate around it. But here's the thing. This ship is not heading towards our North Star right now. It's heading in the exact opposite direction, which means any divergence to the direction of this ship that is caused by us as a movement is going to be towards freedom and away from tyranny. And that's what I'm asking you to do. We don't take our eye off our philosophy. We don't give up our principles. We hold on to those. Those are our guiding star forever. But we understand that this country is not a libertarian nation. It is what it is. And we need to use the power of our vote to steer the ship in a direction around these rocks. And guess what? There's going to be a lot of upside, a lot of benefit to us as libertarians. We can have more money in our lives because of a Donald Trump presidency, more freedom in so many areas, freedom in healthcare, revolutionize the way healthcare is, give people the right to carry their weapon all over the country, state to state, without having to worry about reciprocation laws. This is a really, really big deal. And Mike, give me 20.
So I just got to say, Israel, there's a lot of questions that you skirted there, a lot of statements that you made that just don't sound like Donald Trump, nothing that he said in the past. But this is what I have to say to close. Voting for Gary Johnson in 2 weeks says that we support libertarian candidates in 2017 and 2018 and 2019 and 2020, especially from what I've seen over the past few years on the ground, coaching and mentoring candidates and activists. I've traveled around the country this last year, put on 15 full-day seminars in 15 different states, numerous shorter training sessions, and I've shaken the hands or hugged hundreds of some of the most hardworking candidates, activists, and volunteers all around the country, right, who are putting in their time and their effort to educate as many people as possible on the positive benefits of liberty, to make lasting improvement, not short-term gains, not following the system that's already been in place. That's what you're talking about, right? I've heard their stories. I've heard their reasons why they're running as libertarians. So offices are being set up, infrastructure is being built, personal growth, training, campaigns are getting prepared for 2017 and 2018 by saying that the libertarian needs to vote for an authoritarian is not, it's just not the right way to go. Israel's saying that ideals don't matter, that our libertarian ideals in the long term don't matter, that they could be sacrificed, that victory right now is more important than principle. Whether Donald Trump wins or loses, will he be out campaigning for libertarian candidates and causes afterwards? Will he be out campaigning for libertarians leaning candidates and causes? If you look at his track record, the answer is no. He'll be out campaigning for progressive candidates, right? Will he be donating to libertarian candidates and causes? No. What Israel wants you to do is sacrifice yourself by joining the Republican Party, by trying to take it over again. He's tried this in the past, right? He's trying to con libertarian candidates and activists into leaving the Libertarian Party when we are on the verge of a tipping point. And I'm going to give you a preview of what it will look like if you follow Israel's advice and try to take over the Republican Party. And I've done it. I've been in the trenches, right? This is how it's going to be. It's going to be a civil war within the Republican Party. The neoconservatives, the social conservatives, the libertarian-leaning conservatives, and now insert the Trump Republicans, all trying to take over the Republican Party. I don't want to be in the middle of that. I don't want my name tied to the Republican Party or Donald Trump. I left the Republican Party back in 2011 for a reason, right? These people in the Republican Party, they may agree with libertarians 50% of the time. Donald Trump, 32% of the time. And see, this is the thing. I left the Republican Party because of the infighting, because having to deal with these people on a personal level that are just so against the principles of liberty, right? When I joined the Libertarian Party, it felt like a breath of fresh air. We work together to fight authoritarians. We don't have to fight side by side with authoritarians. Now, there is some infighting within the Libertarian Party, but we're only fighting over the 5 to 10% of things we don't agree with. Most of the time, we're debating strategy and tactics, not policy positions. And take a look at our overall mission. See the growth that we've had over the past 4 years. And this is what I'm talking about. In 2012 in Washington State, we had one candidate on the ballot, and that was Gary Johnson. He got 1.42% of the vote. In 2014, we recruited 12 candidates to run for state representative. And of those 12 candidates, they received over 30% of the vote. We had a record vote total that year. The last year, in 2015, we had 16 candidates running for local office. This is city council, this is school board, this is water board, this is fire district, right? Of those 16 candidates, 5 of them won their races, including Don Myers, 26 years old, won a seat to the Moses Lake City Council. This year, 2016, we have 34 candidates on the ballot, and in August, in the primary, we broke our record again for libertarian vote totals. Our attorney general candidate got 28% of the vote statewide. That's over 330,000 votes for a libertarian candidate. Stephen Nielsen, who ran for public lands commissioner in a 7-way race, got over 5% of the vote. Next year, we'll have anywhere from 50 to 100 candidates running for local winnable races, building out our farm team. And this is not just in Washington, this is all across the country. This is happening. There's massive growth happening, and now is not the time to leave. Building our infrastructure, our technology, building relationships in the community, we can't give up now, because if you represent yourself as a Republican, you have to tie that to yourself. Representing yourself as a libertarian, you actually get to explain what a libertarian is and inform people on the philosophy of liberty. The word libertarian itself means believer in liberty. Liber is ancient Roman for freedom or liberty. Tarian is a suffix for believer in, right? Authoritarians believe in authority, that they can control other people. Libertarians believe in the philosophy of freedom. So with that said, we cannot give up now. Now is the time to double down on our efforts, not give up. But Israel wants you to give up. He wants you to give up on everything that we've built. He wants to cut off our momentum. He's trying to con us, and I, for one, am not going to be conned. There's a great quote by Socrates. The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. If I were to vote for Trump, I'd be betraying myself. I would be trying to rebuild the old. And if there were no libertarian candidate in this race, I would not be voting, period. And Edward Snowden just backed me up with a quote on Twitter. Said, there may never be a safer election in which to vote for a third party. A vote for Gary Johnson is a vote for libertarian now.
A vote for Gary Johnson a vote for a third party. He's a former Republican governor. A vote for an entrepreneur who's held office before is much closer to a third party vote. This election, vote for liberty, not libertarians. Okay, I'm going to be on my live stream on my Facebook page right now. So come and join me if you've got any more questions. I'd love to answer them for you. Michael,